$1 trillion to save the euro. But will it resolve the dysfunction at the heart of Europe's monetary union? Can a unified currency work, or will the taxpayers in the rich EU states end up paying for the blunders of corrupt politicians and bankers? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the programme. I'm Hazem Seeker. The European Union and the International Monetary Fund have pledged to make nearly $1 trillion available in loans, if needed, to defend the European single currency and the Eurozone. The move seemed to put a halt to the domino effect after worries that the latest Greek financial crisis may spread into other EU states. But many analysts say the fundamental problems are not being addressed. Nihat Takar has more.
Ending the European economic crisis, or simply shifting the burden. After weeks of discussion, the European Union and the International Monetary Fund have finally agreed on a package of $1 trillion to rescue the euro. The package will lend money to any debt-stricken country under the umbrella of the European Union.
The fiscal efforts of EU member states, the financial assistance by the Commission and by the member states and the actions taken today by the ECB proves that we shall defend the euro, whatever it takes.
Financially crippled Greece hopes to benefit from this plan. The country has accumulated over $400 billion in debt that is now weighing down its economy. As an EU member state, it was inevitable that Greece's debt crisis would affect the region, especially the Eurozone countries which share the euro as their common currency. The EU hopes its decisive rescue package will contain the damage and put the region firmly on the road to a quick recovery. The $1 trillion is split, with the Eurozone members providing the bulk of the bailout with almost $560 billion. The IMF contributing up to $320 billion. And the European Union putting $78 billion on the table, which means EU countries not using the euro will also share the burden. In return, the Greek government has announced radical cost-cutting measures, including tax hikes, wage cuts and pension reforms. This has led to protests across the country.
I don't have a lot of pensionable years of service. I'm supposed to retire when I'm 65. According to what they say, I'll get 360 euros. What can I do with that? It isn't even enough for cigarettes.
Over the past decade, the Greek government had borrowed heavily whilst drastically increasing its spending. Public sector wages practically doubled during that period. The government now reckons it has very little choice and change is the only way forward.
No intervention would result in the abolishment of pensions. Continuous inaction would have meant the end of pensions for pensioners today and tomorrow.
Changes are needed. The Greece of the past must be left behind. We've had to save Greece before we could change it. By giving in to Europe and the international community, we secured a support mechanism for Greece and its economy.
The impending bailout and reforms are going to be painful for Greece as well as the other EU states. But they're all hoping the drastic measures can save the euro and the European Union from sinking further into economic quicksand. Neha Thakur, Inside Story.
Well, joining our discussion today are our guests in New York. Michael Hudson is a former Wall Street economist and president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trends. In London, Ian Begg is a professorial research fellow at the European Institute at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Also in London, David Buick, markets analyst and partner at the broker BGC Partners. David, if I could start with you. Now, this rescue plan has been largely welcomed by the markets for the time being, at least, but will it be enough?
Well, all you can really say to date is that the dam has been shored up. I think everybody completely underestimates the damage that has been done by not only sovereign debt, but also consumer debt in the course of the last 20 years. And it's going to take a decade to sort it out. I think the way to look at it is if the European Union and the IMF, together with the help of the ECB, who had rejected it last week, together with the Fed agreeing to buy back dollars, hadn't interjected, we would be in a serious mess this week. Because what has happened as a result of intemperate remarks made by Jean-Claude Trichet yesterday was that the interbank market, or what people would like to prefer as the wholesale money markets, became virtually moribund and were reliant for their liquidity almost entirely to the central banks, returning us to the dark days of 2008. And I think anybody who feels that this isn't just the start of what is a rescheduling program to take place over the next 10 years, which is going to be, in my very humble opinion, extremely painful and also damaging to growth, then they delude themselves.
Ian Begg, is this something that Europe needs right now?
Europe certainly needs some sort of recovery package, and I think that there are three distinct problems that are being addressed simultaneously. One is the immediate problem of funding Greek debt and the potential problems that might have arisen for other countries as a result of contagion. The second is dealing with the fiscal crisis, which is that too many countries have spent too much and need to rein back on their public spending. And the third is a much longer term agenda of trying to restore the competitiveness of countries like Greece and Portugal, which have struggled over recent years.
Michael Hudson in New York, I know that investors on Wall Street just down the road from where you are also welcomed this, but is this good news in the long term for taxpayers like you and me?
This is terrible news. No economy has ever grown as a result of austerity. As the first commentator just mentioned, austerity shrinks economies, and it looks like the European economies are indeed going to be shrinking for the next 10 years. That's bad news. The good news is that people who have bought off bonds very cheaply in the last week, speculators have made a killing. Greek bonds were selling at very low prices, and the Wall Street investment banks, the speculators, the gamblers have made a huge killing, and the bankers have made a killing. The bank stocks jumped yesterday. The people have lost, but the bankers are rich, and they're going to get much richer by shrinking economies, by shifting taxes off labor, onto labor, and off property. The rich are going to get much, much richer, but 90% of the economy is going to get much, much poorer year after year. That's why they were rioting in Greece. That's why they've already rioted in the dress rehearsals in Latvia and Iceland. This puts the class war back in business, and it's terrible news.
David Buick, the rich will continue to get richer while the rest of us will fit the bill. What do you make of that?
In isolation, taken as a statement in isolation, I hasten to say that, it's difficult to repudiate it. But the other side of the coin, I would ask Michael to agree with me that the the Greek government have been entirely duplicitous in terms of running their affairs in the course of the last 10 years. And also, I have to profoundly criticize the European Union for not doing an audit on an annual basis since Greece joined the European Union, as we would have been able to understand what had been going on had the financial drains have been pulled up. And as a result of this package, no deal in terms of loans or help comes without very, very tough repayment schedules. And frankly, the Greek economy cannot possibly afford, on the terms that have been laid down as far as I know, to support that. I mean, they are reliant on some ouzo, some wine, a decent shipping industry and tourism, and that is certainly not enough to sustain an economy which has so many thousands of people who don't pay any tax at all and is entirely reliant upon the public sector. And this is the problem that we're up against, is that the European Union is utterly flawed in so many cases. It's utterly ridiculous to expect countries who are strong and also good housekeepers such as Germany, to a slightly lesser degree France, be asked to support lesser mortals. The whole system is utterly flawed and doesn't work, and in my humble opinion never will work.
Michael Hudson, I saw you nodding your head to some of that earlier, not the part about the ouzo drinking, I hasten to add, but about the part that David talked about, that the Greeks really need to bear a lot of responsibility for this. Is that fair?
That's absolutely correct. The Greeks have not taxed wealth. They don't even tax the professional middle classes in Greece. As Leona Helmsley said in America, only the little people pay taxes. So essentially, the Europeans have told Greece, because you're unable to tax the rich, you have to tax the working class much more. You have to tighten the screws on them, and this does not clear up the Greek tax corruption. The Greeks are not taxing real estate, they're not taxing finance, they're not taxing shipping, they're not taxing wealth in almost any form. That is indeed the problem, and this doesn't address it. This makes the Greek labor pay all the more, and it pushes Greece into a chronic depression, and you're going to see emigration from Greece, just as you've seen emigration from Latvia and the Baltics and Iceland and other countries put into this, because the economy doesn't work, and what the Europeans have done is subsidize a bad economy, and that's not a good idea.
Ian Begg, will this be seen as a wake-up call to Europe to get their financial house in order, or will it simply lull many countries into a false sense of security, knowing that they can simply call on this money when things go bad?
Well, there is a danger of what we call in the trade the moral hazard of putting forward a rescue package that people can use and therefore tempting them into bad behaviour. But I think there's a strong sense right across Europe that things have to change in the way in which they administer their affairs. It's certainly true that Greece was a badly run economy, but to listen to my fellow panellists, you think the Greek economy had collapsed. It only fell by 3%, and that's after several years of quite strong growth. Moreover, I would say that Europe is part of the solution, not the problem, because it's the European authorities which are leading the way towards a new model of economic development for a country like Greece. Spain has been a very dynamic economy, and yet we castigate it as being one of the other vulnerable ones. This is sheer nonsense. I think we should recognise that the European Union has been an important motivator of change in these countries and will continue to be so.
All right, well, let's take a look at where some of this money is coming from now. Some analysts have argued that the current crisis is exactly what was needed to trigger what is called a new quantum leap in Europe integration. It seems that everyone in Europe will pay something. Germany will provide the bulk of the package with almost $160 billion. France, Europe's second largest economy, stumps up $119 billion. No escape for the smaller countries in the Eurozone either. Cyprus, for example, will put up more than $1 billion. And even countries not using the euro are committed. The UK, for instance, must provide about $12 billion. So no shortage of money being made available here. But David Buick, does it really address any of the underlying problems that got them in this mess?
First and foremost, there's a big difference between put up and actually writing the cheque and sending it over. The facility is there, and I think, thank goodness, there is a big difference. Hopefully these facilities will have a very limited drawdown. But I'd like to just take a little bit of issue with Ian over the Spanish economy being strong. I'm sure, and I would ask him to agree with me, that 18% of Spain is unemployed, much of it associated with the property market, with, as I understand it, something like 2.5 million units unused. Now, this is a poor appropriation of labour in a country that is A, enormous, B, pretty rural, and in my humble opinion will take an enormous length of time to get through that. Whatever banks such as Santander, BBVA and others say, it is a pretty nasty looking albatross. And I think this is the problem with many of these economies which haven't got a broad-based economy. It's terribly hard for themselves to pull themselves out of that. In my opinion, Italy may come into that category as well, though it's got a lot more industrial output and manufacturing as well to get it out of a hole. But it strikes me again, though, that it is still the two major countries that are pulling their weight more than the others, and it's a question of asking for disciplines.
All right, let's send that back to Ian then. Ian Begg, is that a fair assessment?
It's certainly correct to stress that the money that's been put on the table, this famous $1 trillion, is probably intended not to be spent. Its whole purpose is to underpin the capacity of the individual countries to borrow openly in the markets. And there's a strong sense of frustration, even exasperation among many European leaders that we are being dictated to such an extent by the markets, as though the markets are these wonderful authorities that know everything and can judge everything correctly. Let's not forget that it was the markets that got us into the financial crisis in the first place. So I think that there's going to be much change in Europe in the way in which we try to regulate financial services to stop this kind of froth that is so damaging to the real economy. Now, there are weaknesses and strengths across every European country. Spain, if you look at the figures over a decade or so, has had the biggest employment increase of any country in the European Union and has attracted a huge amount of immigrant labour from South America, from Romania and from other parts of the European Union. And it's only now that there's a downturn, a temporary downturn, I think, that you see the rise in unemployment. It's actually a disguised rise in unemployment because much of it is people working in the informal economy and claiming to be unemployed when they're not really.
So let's widen this out a little bit. Does this spell the beginning of the end of the Euro project, as many people have said? That question to you, David Buick, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, I thought it was Michael's turn. Does it? No, but I think it puts it under the microscope. I think, as I say, the whole system is flawed. What's concerned me over the last 5 years, and I'd be much more interested in Michael and Ian's thoughts on this, because they're both economists, is that the European Union has become a political springboard rather than a financial one. And everything is done for political ends rather than financial ends. And they've taken their eye off the ball, and they've given themselves, in my opinion, an insurmountable problem to get some equilibrium from all countries, regardless of size and contribution. And I'm not certain that it's the system as we know it today is sustainable.
Michael Hudson, that's a point well taken. Is it a question here of effective governance?
It's ineffective government, and the problem, I think, is precisely the opposite, that Europe has been run financially for the benefit of creditors. Part of this package, for instance, 60 billion euros was to go to bail out Swedish banks and Austrian banks on their bad real estate debts owed by the Baltics, by Hungary, and Romania. Now, take Latvia, for instance. Latvia is a country with more than 50% flat tax on labor and a 0.1% on property. That's why there was a property bubble. The Latvians parties are now saying, we are not going to repay the euro debt. We repudiate the debt to the IMF. We repudiate the debt to the European community. And they are probably going to lead the post-Soviet economies out of the European Union. To them, the European Union is treating the ex-Soviet economies as colonies, as bank colonies, as trade colonies, and they're not going to go along with it. And they're planning not only to repudiate their debt, but to repudiate Europe, just as if countries were withdrawing from the old Roman Empire. For them, the European Central Bank has been lending money to bail out kleptocrats. They've been lending money to Latvia to pay the Swedish banks. They've been lending money to Hungary and Romania to pay the Austrian banks, and this is purely a ripoff. The country's voters are rejecting it. You're going to see elections in Latvia this fall where a party comes to power rejecting Europe, and this is going to be the beginning of the breakup of Europe, and thank God it's a good thing, because Europe is no longer the social democratic ideal that it was in 1957 with the European community. It has turned into a pro-financial, pro-banking demand for austerity and economic shrinkage, and the other countries, the victims of this bailout, are going to stop the contagion.
Ian Begg, you were shaking your head there earlier. You don't see it that way?
I think it's just utter nonsense, and it's the sort of thing you often hear from people from the other side of the Atlantic who simply don't understand the European Union. What's happening in Europe is that there's a strong attachment of many of the countries which have joined in the last 6 years, that's 2004 and 2007, they want to make a success of their participation in the European single market, which they see as the source of their future prosperity. They do not, in any sense, I have no sign whatsoever of any country of these new entrants seeking to leave, so that it's far-fetched to believe that this is even on the agenda, let alone a credible possibility.
Michael, I see you shaking your head there to some of that. Your response?
I am the head of the committee of experts that is drawing up the platform for the major party in Latvia. I don't think the British know a thing about the Baltics. How dare they talk about Europe as if they know about Europe? I'm speaking officially on behalf of the Baltics. I can assure you we want no part of your Europe.
Ian Begg, there's a lot of people in Europe that think that their governments have really made a mess of this. Isn't that a valid point?
There are certainly governments which are being condemned by their populations for bad policies. That's the case of the outgoing Greek government of Karamanlis. I think that what's happened in Greece now is that you see a willingness to confront the difficulties that successive governments have avoided over 2 decades. You see similar things going on in other countries. Estonia, which I think is still in the Baltics, wants to join the euro in January and will be approved to join it. So the idea that there's a wave of countries seeking to dissociate themselves from Europe is just so far-fetched as to be ludicrous. And I would ask another question. California is a state, the biggest state in the United States, which has a severe fiscal difficulties of its own. Does anyone talk seriously about the dollar breaking up or California leaving the Union?
That's a valid point. I'll let Michael respond to that in just a moment, but I just want to bring David Buick back in here. David, is this the end of a great European experiment here?
Well, I mean, I have to say my sympathies are with Michael, but for my reasons are completely different. My concern, and bless Michael for his concern over Latvia, because some of these small countries do need some consideration. But I'd like to take the point up with Ian that my major concern with Europe, as I think I mentioned early on, is the imbalance. We have constituted whatever it is, 24 countries, all of varying and differing sizes, all making some or no contribution. And, basically it is a situation or a group for the strong. And I think it's a mess. And I have to say it was by misjudgment, but I am absolutely so delighted that the United Kingdom, when Sir John Major and Lord Lamont were Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer, that we got booted out of the ERM. I don't think the United Kingdom knows how lucky it was. We're still a member of the European Union, but thank gracious we're not the member of the Euro. And I really believe that for the next 10 years, the European Union as we know it is severely under the cosh.
Michael Hudson, do you think that the UK dodged a bullet here, so to speak? Should they be thankful that they're not in the Euro?
I think they should be glad that they're not in the euro. They still have problems of their own. Most of their growth has been in the financial sector rather than in the real sector. But certainly the issue of the euro is different from Europe as a whole. And the euro as such is a project really run by the European Central Bank for the bankers against the populations as a whole. And that's why there's been a wholesale emigration from the Baltics. That's why you have so many people from the Baltics going to Ireland, England, and other countries. 1/3 of the adult population between 20 and 35 plans to emigrate from Latvia in the next 5 years. This is emptying out the economy. People are fleeing the economy there. That is not the promise of a growing economy. There's no way an economy can grow its way out of debt when its population is fleeing and not even coming back from Ireland when Ireland is undertaking the problems it's going. So I think that the canary in the coal mine really is in the north of Europe, not in the south.
All right, that is going to have to be the last word, gentlemen. Thanks to all our guests, Ian Begg, Michael Hudson, and David Buick. Thanks very much for joining us in what I'm sure you'll agree has been a very spirited discussion on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.